I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Harman.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we
wonderful.
Can.
Thank you for that very warm welcome. It's very good to be with you. So I'm going to talk for around 20 minutes around climate justice and some of the ways that you can get involved in campaigning and working for climate justice, particularly ahead of the G7, which is coming up very, very soon. So I believe, Jenny, you're going to be doing the slides for us. Brilliant. The slides are just coming up now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about climate justice. So I'm going to move straight to the next slide. So as we know, while the world has focused quite rightly on the coronavirus pandemic over the past, since February last year, well over a year now, what we know is that the climate crisis hasn't gone away. The world continues to warm, creating more floods, more storms, more droughts. And as we've known for decades, and as Christian Aid has been saying for decades, it's the poorest and the most marginalized people on the planet who are suffering. If I can get the next slide, we've got a picture of Rosalia from a small village in Western Kenya. And she says, we have gone almost 7 years without experiencing reliable rainfall. And the drought that has hit this area for about 2 years. We have not received rains. I am worried. I'm not sure if the rain will come. And this is a story that Christian Aid, through our work in over 50 countries around the world, hears from across countries in Africa, across countries in Latin America, across countries in Asia and the Middle East, this pattern of extreme weather really hitting the poorest and the most marginalized people the hardest. And these extreme weather events getting more and more frequent and more severe as climate change takes hold. And people like Rosalia, they're doing what they can to tackle the climate crisis, even though they've done nothing to create it. But the only way we can really solve this crisis is for the governments of rich countries like the UK to take responsibility for the crisis that we've helped create. Countries like ourselves in the UK, we must urgently reduce our emissions and really step up to support communities who are living with the impacts of the climate crisis. Fundamentally, it's an issue of justice. And when we think about the idea of justice and how do we respond justly, I just want to read a quick quote from Makita Mwenda from the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. He says, to tackle climate change justly is to ensure that the problem is addressed through deeper emissions cuts at the source, rather than transferring that burden to poor countries who have not caused the problem. And when I think about this, I'm very much drawn to the words and the thinking of Martin Luther King, whose faith really drew him towards the concept that the establishment of justice can only be understood as the embodiment of love. And if we are truly to love the planet, to care for creation, and to love our neighbours, then we must strive for justice. We must strive to right wrongs and implement justice. And we feel at Christian Aid that we must use all of our collective power, however small that might feel sometimes, but we should use all of our collective power towards that end. And to quote Martin Luther King himself, he said that power at its best is love, implementing those demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. And the climate crisis really is standing against justice and against love. And so when we think about the power that we have, if I could just move to the next slide, it's sometimes very easy to feel powerless. But we actually in the UK this year have quite a lot of power. We have quite a lot of voice and we have quite a lot of influence as we work towards climate justice. We have a really unique opportunity. And that's because the UK government is hosting 2 huge summits that are kind of huge on the world stage. There's the G7 happening in Cornwall in just over a month's time. And there's the crucial UN climate talks known as COP26 happening in Glasgow in November. And we must use these opportunities to make our voices heard, because from now on, every single moment matters and every single action counts in our struggle for climate justice. And so these 2 moments are really crucial. And because the UK is hosting these 2 moments, I think it provides 2 distinct opportunities for influence. One of them is that as the host of these big conferences, the UK has a real role to play in shaping the agenda, in championing climate justice, and getting good results out of those conferences. And it will want to do that. It will want to be seen as a world leader. All the talk around global Britain and we're hearing very strong statements from the UK government around climate change. It wants to position itself as a champion here. And that gives us the opportunity to push for ambitious outcomes. But also, whilst it's hosting these two big events and wants to be seen as a champion on this issue, it's a chance for us to really push the UK on its own domestic climate policy. So regardless of what happens at the G7, regardless of what happens at COP26, as we go into 2022 and beyond, we really need to push the UK to be at the forefront of the fight for climate justice. So like I say, two crucial opportunities really framed by the G7 and COP. And so what's the key issue at the heart of the campaign for climate justice? For Christian Aid, we believe that the UK must use its position as host and as champion in this next year to really increase financial support for the world's poorest countries. We want to see extra finance given, we want to see their debts cancelled, and all of this so that they can better confront the climate crisis. I make no apologies for repeating myself when I say we have the solutions to tackle the crisis, but we must urgently reduce emissions, particularly from fossil fuels, and tackle the crisis in a way that rich countries address the disproportionate responsibility for the crisis and support those living with the impacts. And that means money. It means finance. Like I say, money is really at the heart of climate justice. Money is needed to help communities who've already lost so much. Money is needed to help those same communities adapt their farming methods or create new jobs because old ones are no longer viable because of the changes to the climate. Money is needed to ensure that everybody has access to clean energy, not just us in the rich nations. And money is needed to restore the natural habitats that have protected against further damage and protected against climate change for so long. And so without money, without climate finance, we cannot have climate justice. I want to give you a bit more information on that kind of responsibility that the UK has and our historical responsibilities. We are historically the 6th largest emitter of greenhouse gases. And so in this year, like I say, as host of the G7 and as COP26, it's only right that as one of those biggest emitters, we take a leading role in contributing to tackling that crisis and ensuring that other rich and polluting nations do the same thing. In 2009, the world's richer nations, including the UK, have already agreed to deliver $100 billion a year. That agreement was made, like I say, in 2009 to provide $100 billion a year to the world's poorest and most climate vulnerable countries by 2020. This promise, quite simply, has not been fulfilled. And now we know more about the crisis. We know that even if it was fulfilled, $100 billion a year is not enough. There are lots of technicalities and specific mechanisms around how money is funneled and how it's given over, and a lot of that happens within complex processes within the COP talks. And Rosh and Shannon may say a little more about that in their talk coming up. But fundamentally, I want to make the point that regardless of what mechanisms we're looking at and how money is provided, the fundamental thing is that to make progress this year, finance has to be provided for the world's poorest and most climate vulnerable countries that they need to tackle the climate crisis. And if it doesn't, the climate talks could completely collapse, which would have major consequences for our chances of limiting climate breakdown. So specifically, what do we want? We want more money for climate projects and to cancel unfair debts. We think this money must be new money. It can't come from the existing aid budget, and it must be grants. It can't be given in the form of loans. And we want this money to be well spent. We want this money to help communities really adapt to the changes that they're seeing and to really help stop further damage. So how can you and how can we get involved? We can move on to the next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about one particular action ahead of the G7 and then kind of hand over. But I just wanted to say, first of all, that as the church, I think it's really important that we're getting involved. To paraphrase Catalina Tahafi Williams, a Tongan Australian theologian, she said that the prophetic role of the Christian church is to provide hope-filled possibilities for actions to reduce the impact of climate change. And things like Eco Church and Climate Sunday, which have already been mentioned, are great ways to do that. She goes on to say that the role of the Christian church, it courageously challenges vested interests for the sake of the whole wounded creation, for the poor and for future generations. And so if I can just move on quickly to I think my second to last slide. One of the ways that Christian Aid and the wider Faith for the Climate community are really pushing for action ahead of the G7 is we're asking people to send a postcard to Boris Johnson. Now, this isn't one of your classic kind of NGO mass-produced postcards. We want people to find postcards from their part of the world and send them to Boris Johnson with a message for them to, for Boris Johnson to really champion climate finance at the G7. I can pop a link into the chat bar when I finish speaking. We've got all the suggested text on Christian Aid's website, and we really want those messages. We know we can't all necessarily be in Cornwall for the G7, but we want the message that we care about this issue of climate finance to be heard loud and clear. And so, like I say, we've got some suggested text, and we really want postcards from around the UK so that the government see that this is an issue that everybody cares about. So that's one small thing we can do ahead of the G7. But what about after that? I can get the next slide. After the G7, we quickly move on to COP26. There'll be kind of 5 months or so in between, and I think Beth and Flo are going to say a lot more about kind of how you can get involved in what the Youth Christian Climate Network are doing. But I think I just wanted to make the point that Christian Aid is kind of, you know, a big established NGO working on climate change for what must be close to 15 years now. We really recognise and notice, I think what hopefully we all do, is that young people and youth leadership on this issue of climate change, they're not the leaders of tomorrow, they're the leaders of now. Social change is really happening because young people are stepping up and making it so, whether that's school strikers, Fridays for Future, initiatives we've seen. I've got a selection of pictures here throughout the past few years. They've really elevated the issue of climate justice and really, I think, recognising as people more affected by climate justice, like our friends in the Global South, that this is an issue that needs dealing with now. And so I guess I just wanted to really encourage you to really get behind some of the stuff that Bethany and Flo are going to talk to you about, and just to say as well that Christian Aid are absolutely 100% behind the Youth Christian Climate Network's efforts and the relay from G7 to COP. But without kind of stealing any thunder or any further ado, I'll hand over to is it Beth? Am I handing over to you?
Yeah. All right. Hello, everyone. We do have some slides, if those could be put up. Awesome. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here today. It's really exciting that we get to speak to you today about the relay to COP26. Just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Beth. I'm 22. I'm in my final year at university. I'm actually in my final term, which is slightly scary. And I'm here to represent YCCN, which is the Young Christian Climate Network. In a little bit, Flo will be speaking on the London part of our relay, but just for now, I wanted to explain a little bit about what the relay is, who YCCN are, and how we believe this can actually make an impact. So for those of you who don't know, YCCN is an action-focused community of 18 to 30-year-olds from across the UK, from across denominations, who are passionate about seeing the church live out its faith and worship God by seeking climate justice. Luke has done a really great job in explaining what climate justice is and why it's so important to us, especially from a faith point of view. And the thing is, YCCN care about this because we love God. Very simply, we love God and we love our neighbours. And we believe that climate justice is something that is so important to God. And so we're passionate about seeing the UK church rise up as one, as a collective, at all levels, across all denominations, to come together, rise up and raise our collective voice regarding climate change. We want to see the church at all levels standing in solidarity with our brothers and sisters around the world, particularly those who are in the communities that are most vulnerable to the impacts of the climate crisis. And we also want to see the church at all levels be a beacon of hope and people who speak out of a vision of hope and of a fairer, more just world. And so we come to the relay to COP26. This is our offering, so to speak, to the UK churches. We want to invite you guys to join us on this journey as young people who are so passionate about seeing the church rise up and rise to the moment of having the G7 and COP26 here in the UK on our doorstep. We don't want the church to be missing this opportunity, and so we've created the Relay to COP26 as a way of getting churches from all denominations joining with the young people of today to build a better, fairer future for tomorrow. And so the Relay is, well, we actually like to call it a pilgrimage for the 21st century. It's a 1,000+ mile relay at the moment. It starts at the G7 in Cornwall next month, and it ends in Glasgow for COP26 in November. So that's 4 months of this relay, though we're only planning to be walking for about 90 days of that. We're walking with local communities, with local churches of all denominations as we pass through that area. And we're also hoping along the route, when we pass through cities, to have big celebrations. For example, in early August, we'll be coming to London. And so we're inviting you guys, the churches in South London, to come connect in with the relay when we come into London and celebrate with us, and also use this moment to call on our leaders to be brave, bold, and ambitious in seeking climate justice. So Flo will be talking on that in just a minute. But our ambition is that this relay is accessible, that it's open to all, regardless of denomination, regardless of age or ethnicity. We hope that this relay is full of conviction and that it's totally rooted in our faith. And we also want this to be a celebratory relay. We don't want to forget that as Christians, we believe and we have hope in the renewal of all things through Christ Jesus. Hope is powerful. Hope is what makes us act. And we want to make sure that hope is at the center of this relay as we go out, as we speak to and engage with our communities and global leaders. We can make a difference, but as Luke said, we have to start making that difference now. We have to start acting now. People won't act without hope. And so that is what is hopefully at the heart of this relay. I think it's also important to make note of the fact that though YCCN may be leading this relay, we may be facilitating it, it isn't ours. We don't own it. We consider this an offering to the UK churches as an opportunity for you to come and join in with us on this journey. We see it as an opportunity to unite together as one body of Christ, a church without walls, I think, as the bishop said earlier. We have this opportunity to unite together, to raise a collective voice and call on the government to be ambitious, to commit to doing all they can to stop global temperatures rising above that 1.5 degrees Celsius limit. And also, we want to do this for the sake of our global neighbours. Luke explained really well earlier the need for increased and well-spent climate finance. And so like Christian Aid, YCCN want the political focus of our relay to be on climate finance. And this, we think, is a great way for churches and communities to connect in with the relay and connect in with the vision of climate justice. We're hoping it will capture the imagination of the church. Communities and churches can call on the UK government by contacting MPs, by sending postcards to the PM and asking them to protect people, not bank balances. We want to make sure no country goes into debt because of climate change and climate-related finance. And we also want to see the foreign aid budget restored to its pre-COVID levels as an act of love and an act of solidarity with our friends, with our brothers and sisters around the world. We want the UK to be supporting those who are most affected and those who are already the most affected, and not just leaving them to deal with the burden of climate disasters on their own. Historically, the church have led the way on fighting and overcoming so many issues of injustice. We see this relay as an opportunity for Christians to both impact our communities and also impact global decision makers. The more publicity we can get around this relay, the more churches like yourselves come and engage with us, support us, both in person and on social media. We have a whole bunch of hashtags that people can use, and we'd love for you to just spread the word on your social media accounts and engage. And the more you engage with your communities and with your MPs, the more we can show the world and the rest of the country that this is something Christians care about, that this is something Christians won't stay silent about. And we can also use it as a way of witnessing to the world about the love and grace of God, about the hope we have in God. So I think a way to sum this up is we want the UK churches to ultimately be able to look back on 2021 and be able to say, not that we just sat at home and we didn't do anything whilst unjust decisions were being made on our doorstep. We want the UK church to be able to say, we set sail towards a brighter, more just future, that we actually did something as a way of worshipping God and bringing his kingdom onto earth. So I'm now going to pass over to Flo, who will be speaking a little bit more on our plans regarding the relay as we pass through London.
Hiya, just a quick introduction. My name is Flo, I'm 19, I'm on a gap year in London at the moment, and my kind of role in YCCN at the moment is that I'm this residency hub team leader for London. This basically means that I'm kind of coordinating the events that happen as the relay is in London. I think the main thing to kind of point out about the time in London is that we really want it to actually be a stop. So we're not necessarily doing a big route through London. And I don't think we're going massively south. I think, although we're still doing a lot of waiting for churches to confirm, the most south we seem to be going is to St Paul's Church in Clapham. I don't know if you've heard of that church, but we'd still really love you to be involved. So there'll be a couple of big events, one that Christian Aid is helping us host, that we're not sure where that's going to be yet, and also potentially an event at St Martin in the Fields. And just a few suggestions for things you could do. We thought something like a tributary would be really great. So this could be if a group of people from South London churches wanted to all walk together to central London to join us at one of these events. We've got a boat that you are more than welcome to borrow for that. It's going to be kind of with a huge sail that we're getting different patches of fabric from countries all around the world to represent our kind of love for brothers and sisters in different countries affected by the climate crisis. It will have photographs of how the climate crisis has affected those countries. So I've kind of put my email on there. So if you have any kind of specific questions about that, please feel free to contact me. Also, you'll see on YCCN, our website, we've got a sign up link. So if you're wanting to join in with the walking, which we would love you to do, although we are 18 to 30 as in the YCCN, as Beth mentioned, the relay is for everybody, whatever age, whatever denomination. We'd love you to come and walk with us. So do sign up for a couple of days of walking. If that's something you'd be interested in, share it around with anyone else you think might be interested in. And as the Bishop mentioned earlier about the Climate Sunday, we thought it would be brilliant if, you know, loads of churches could do a Climate Sunday whilst YCCN are passing through their area. So if loads of churches did it on that Sunday whilst we're here in August, that would be so great. I think that'd just be a wonderful picture of kind of churches coming together and showing that climate is something that they prioritise. What else have I got here? Yeah, and again, we just really want you to take ownership of this. So if you're organising a tributary or having a service, do let us know. We would love to hear all about that, but we don't have most of us are here on a voluntary basis. We don't have the kind of capacity to plan things for you in a way, although we will have a few things happening in London. I think that's everything. I don't know, Beth might let me know if I've missed something. Oh, and yeah, one more thing. Although we've got the dates 5th to 9th of August, which is when YCCN is going to be in central London, of course, do not feel restricted by those events. If you think, yes, we'd love to do a Climate Sunday, but we can't do it on those events, or if you think you might do some kind of walk with your church, it doesn't have to be in those dates at all. Again, take ownership, do what you want with it, and we're happy to guide you. And yeah, sign up on our website would be the easiest way. Does anybody have any questions for me or Bethany? Well, anyway.
No, there's a question about the website of YCCN on the chat.
So the link, I mean, it's tiny, it's underneath the map of the UK, just literally yccn.uk. But if you just search YCCN, you'll find us. We have a very snazzy website that we're proud of. Sorry, I haven't been looking on the chat. Oh yeah, Beth put the chat on there. Anything else? Otherwise, feel free to jot down my email. I'm happy to be inundated. Yeah, I mean, happy for you to have your event in October if that's what works for your church. We are realising that people are away in August when we're doing lots of these events, and that's completely up to your church. Sure, I think that's all from us. Yeah.
Now over to Rosh.
I think Shannon is going to speak first, and then I will be coming in second. So
yes,
I'll pass over to Shannon.
Thank you. Thanks, Rosh. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Bishop Karowei, for that lovely warm welcome. Really wonderful to hear from Luke and Bethany and Flo. I'm feeling extra special tonight because it is Ramadan. I am Muslim and I'm observing Ramadan, and it's actually the final 10 days, which is a very special time for Muslims who observe Ramadan. And to be able to share this with you, I think is an enormous blessing. So thank you so much for your hospitality and your welcome, and for giving us the opportunity to explain our work to you. Before I start the slide share, let me just introduce myself. My name is Shannon Shah, and I am Director of Faith for the Climate. Faith for the Climate is a national organization. It's multi-faith. It has representatives of people from different faiths, but we also have a very special relationship with churches in South London, because our founder and chair, who is also here tonight, is Canon Giles Goddard, who is Vicar of St. John's Church in Waterloo, and also a canon at Southwark Cathedral. So lots of lovely connections to be making tonight. I will start a slide share now just to introduce Faith for the Climate, who we are, what we do. Sorry, that. I'll go back to the beginning of my slides. Yeah. So as I said, Faith for the Climate is a multi-faith organization. We are national. We do what it says in the title. We are people of faith who are interested in climate action in many different ways, many different levels of action. How we began is we were founded in 2014 to help organize the pilgrimage to Paris. And at that time it was to the UN conference on climate change that was held in Paris that year, the following year in 2015, known as COP21, where the historic Paris Agreement was signed. And here you can see a group of pilgrims on the steps of St. Martin in the Fields, just setting off on their pilgrimage. And you can see, if you train your eyes very carefully, Giles holding the poster in the middle with a few other people. And so from there, we grew and became more multi-faith in our coverage, more national. And our events since then, you know, they regularly bring together bishops, rabbis, imams, priests, and people of all faiths, really, and, you know, people who don't identify with the faith, but who want to work with faith groups as well. So we bring together all these different people to provide thought leadership and to help equip faith communities, wherever they are, whatever they're prepared to do, to respond to the crisis of climate change. So building on these beginnings, our focus this year and over the next couple of years is really, on one hand, grassroots movement building, which my colleague Rosh will be telling you more about, and also our work on COP26, the UN Conference on Climate Change. So how did our work on COP26 come about? Well, as soon as we found out that COP was going to take place in the UK, that the UK was going to be COP president, a few different faith leaders, grassroots, and at many different levels got together and thought, well, we need a kind of working group for the different faith communities in the UK that want to concentrate on COP. And at that point, this discussion was led by Giles as founder of Faith for the Climate, and also Andy Atkins, who many of you will know, who is representing the Environmental Issues Network of churches together in Britain and Ireland. So then we started convening this informal working group of people of different faiths. So, you know, I work very closely with Luke from Christian Aid, who is a huge part of these meetings as well, and also CAFOD and Tear Fund, the Quakers in Britain, Islamic Relief, Hindu and Buddhist representatives as well. So we started off by meeting 2 to 3 times, so once every 2 to 3 months from 2019. And as of this year, the closer we get to COP, we've been increasing the frequency of our meetings. So we meet online once a month, and we also collaborate together on Slack, which is an online work collaboration platform. You can see our advocacy principles, our general principles, and the terms of reference for this group, which my colleague Rosh will be pasting in the chat. So over the months that we were meeting and discussing things organically, we sort of came up with some priority actions that we could do together as different faith groups in the UK. So we wanted to focus on a strong political side of our work. So we've developed some policy advocacy asks, and that's what I'll be concentrating on tonight. We also wanted more transformation at the level of our congregations and faith communities at the grassroots level. And also we wanted to contribute to the work on hospitality leading up to the COP26 event in Glasgow, in different parts of the country, and also in Glasgow itself during COP in November. So we actually work really closely with our interfaith partners and churches in Scotland as well to coordinate all our actions and just different resources that we share with each other. So actually the two big actions that you've heard about tonight already, so the climate finance postcard action from Christian Aid, and also the Rise to the Moment relay from the Young Christian Climate Network. We are fully behind those efforts. We support them 100% in any way that we can as a network. And also there are a few other things we support that other faith groups are doing as well. So there are lots of things happening out there, lots of events, lots of campaigns, lots of resources in this very important year, and they're all necessary and they're all important. And because of the kind of year we're having, kind of last couple of years we've been having, they're all probably at different stages of readiness. So that in the interest of time, I'm not going to do a survey of all of them. I'm just going to focus on the key messages we've decided to focus on at Make COP Count, which is this group that we convene at Faith for the Climate. So as Luke and Bethany have already said very eloquently, finance really is where it's at. And I won't repeat what they've said, but because of this focus on finance, we have had to think about how we can best contribute to all the actions that are happening this year on the climate, because there will be many different climate groups focusing on the UK government, focusing on other governments in the lead up to COP, with very specific demands on climate justice. But as different faith groups, this is where we think we can add the most value and have the greatest impact because of the moral voice that we can have on this issue, wherever we are, and also the connections that we have with our communities, not just within the UK, but all around the world. So there's a chance for global mobilization that lots of faith groups in the UK can be catalysts for as well. And of course, when we talk about finance, we know that money is not the whole solution to the crisis. But unless we start directing money away from fossil fuels and into clean energy and addressing climate impacts, all our government's pledges will be hollow. So my colleague Rosh will just be pasting these key asks, and I'll just speak to them a little bit. So the first, and remember these are advocacy asks where we support lots of other actions and resources as well. But the first specific advocacy ask we have is to basically stop the funding of climate breakdown. So we're asking for the UK government to end its use of public funding for fossil fuels here and overseas. And as Luke said, lots of groups have already been campaigning on the overseas funding piece, and the government finally changed its policy on funding overseas fossil fuel projects in December 2020. And this was a huge victory for campaigners such as Christian Aid, such as CAFORD, and lots of other groups. But we're still retaining this ask and asking the UK government to focus on subsidies that still exist within the UK. So the UK government claims that it has no fossil fuel subsidies, but actually it does. And its reporting on this is quite opaque, and it takes the form of tax breaks, including for oil and gas extraction. And we know the evidence says that fossil fuel subsidies disproportionately put poorer people at a disadvantage. It is the next advocacy ask on loss and damage that I really want to spend a bit more time focusing on. When we talk about activism and advocacy around COP26, we really do have to, gain a foothold on the language of the Paris Agreement and what it's asking for and what it means. And it's easy to get intimidated or alienated by the highly technical and legal language and just the jargon that exists in these international treaties. But they have real ramifications for people all around the world, including the UK, and we as faith groups can really say something about this. So I'm going to spend a bit of time just explaining to you why we have come to loss and damage finance as a key advocacy point. So in the language of the Paris Agreement, there are 3 pillars of climate action. So the first is referred to as mitigation. So this means cutting emissions at source to avoid global heating as far as possible. So stopping the burning of fossil fuels and so on. The next pillar of climate action is adaptation, which is what we do to change our buildings, our use of land, and so on, so that we can live with the impacts of climate change. Now, the third pillar of climate action is referred to as loss and damage. And this refers to impacts that are so severe that societies just cannot adapt to them. So this includes things that change slowly and that we can't really perceive day to day, like the rise in sea levels. But it can also refer to very sudden and extreme events, like extreme weather events, such as severe hurricanes and droughts. So this is a picture of what we're talking about when we refer to loss and damage. This was the cyclone in Mozambique, Cyclone Idai, which killed more than 1,000 people and left 400,000 people homeless and destroyed 700,000 hectares of crops when it struck in 2019. Now, there were lots of international fundraising appeals, but they raised less than 50% of their target. And this forced Mozambique to borrow from international institutions. And Mozambique is not alone. Many other countries are trapped in a very similar spiral of worsening climate impacts, which they cannot address because of the burden of debt. And again, I said we're focusing on finance, but it's not just about money. So loss and damage also isn't just about money. It also includes what is referred to in the Paris Agreement as non-economic losses. So these are things that you really can't put a price on, like the loss of biodiversity, the loss of sacred lands, places of worship, cultural monuments, and local traditions. And the thing is, even though the Paris Agreement mentions the need for loss and damage, there has been no progress since the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015 on how exactly this should be funded. So we believe at Faith for the Climate and Make COP Count that funding for loss and damage should come out of the pockets of those who have been the most responsible for the crisis, as Luke so eloquently put it. The burden shouldn't be put on those who are already struggling. And we can do this in many different ways without governments going, without killing themselves over it. There could be measures such as a global aviation levy, a global fossil fuels tax, or debt cancellation for the global South nations. And until very recently, the UK government refused to talk about loss and damage. But earlier last month actually, in April, our COP president designate, Alok Sharma, finally acknowledged that loss and damage is one of the areas that needs action. He just didn't commit to any financial figures or milestones or any kind of concrete commitments. So this is a victory. This mention of loss and damage is the result of campaigning by civil society groups, including especially faith groups. But we have to go further and ask for loss and damage finance. So that is why these are two key areas of focus for us. I'll just go to the previous slide. Just in summary, as faith groups, and this is something we can all sign up to, all the churches that are part of Make COP Count, the different Muslim groups, Hindu, Jewish, Buddhist, and Sikh groups. This is what we have all agreed on. And I think as people of different faiths, we believe that our collective voice can really drive home the point of why this is so urgent. So ending all use of public money to subsidize fossil fuels and just have new and additional finance for climate-related loss and damage. I look forward to your questions, but before that, I will hand over to my colleague, Rosh.
Great, thank you, Shannon. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. Thank you for having us, and thanks for listening. To introduce myself, I'm Rosh, and I joined Faith for the Climate as a movement builder in January. So Shannon's been talking about one element of Faith for the Climate's work, which is convening the Make COP Count coalition, which it aims to give faith communities a voice at the UN climate talks in November. There's another element to the work which I lead on, which is facilitating grassroots interfaith climate action. And prior to me joining in 2020, Faith for the Climate, as well as our partners at Christian Aid, Quakers in Britain, and Islamic Relief, ran some movement building workshops in Leicester, the Leeds Bradford area, and in Manchester. And these brought people from different faith backgrounds in those areas together to learn about how crucial this year is for the climate and for all of us, with the UK hosting the G7 in Cornwall and with the UN climate talks also being hosted by the UK in Glasgow in November. And these were great moments of bringing together people from different faith backgrounds, but who are united in their concern and their compassion for nature and for all of us who rely on it. So these interfaith workshops really represented the diversity of the many faith communities across the UK, and like I say, really highlight the universal values at the heart of all faiths, the values of compassion and care for nature and the earth. And at Faith for the Climate, we also work quite closely with four environmental organisations from minority faith backgrounds. So there is EcoSeek UK, the Bahu Trust, which is a Sufi Muslim organisation, the Eco Dharma Network, and Hindu Climate Action. And our links with those organisations helped bring people from those diverse faith communities to the interfaith workshops. So the format of the workshops, there was an initial session where we heard from a local faith leader from those three regions I mentioned, and there were a number of relationship building activities and information on the importance of this year for the climate crisis. There were also 3 skills sessions, one on talking to people in power, one on bringing people with us into the movement by building effective stories, and a final one on effective actions. And the series was concluded with a final session on actions different faith communities can take together on the climate. So these workshops are a real success in that they highlighted and strengthened the relationship between different faith communities in those regions, and people were able to share information on how crucial this year is for the climate, and they led to new connections and interfaith collaborations. So I'm telling you all this because I am hoping to run new workshops in South London. So as part of my role as a movement builder, I'm hoping to run the workshop series again in Sheffield, where I currently live, and also South London. I have provisional dates for South London for your calendars. I'll be working again with partners at Islamic Relief, Christian Aid, and Quakers in Britain to deliver them, and we hope to invite yourselves and all other faith communities in South London to be a part of them. Please put these dates in your diary. The sessions will be happening in the evening online in and around London Climate Action Week. So we should have participants from all over South London joining. We will confirm the dates in the coming weeks. We have to make sure our partners are able to do them too. And we will be sending out promotional material that I hope to share with yourselves, as well as the registration links for the sessions. So how can you get involved in Faith for the Climate's work? So Shannon collates all of the wonderful, amazing faith and interfaith climate action that takes place in the UK in Faith for the Climate's monthly e-news, which you can subscribe to in the link. And also, we are also on all the socials on Twitter and Facebook if you use those. You can also get in touch with us directly. You can get in touch with Shannon to talk more about the work, Faith for the Climate's work at COP, or with myself to talk about the grassroots movement building work, or to know more about the South London workshops. So please don't hesitate to get in touch. And that just leaves me to say thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Rosh and Shannon, and to all our speakers. That's fantastic. We are going to have a slight change to the proposed plan, and we're going to actually do Q&As kind of with everybody present. So do think about any questions you'd like to pose to the speakers. I know there are some in there already, but please do place your questions in the chat and we will take those in a moment or two. Just before we go to the questions, so feel free to think of them and write them down, we are going to listen to Canon Giles Goddard about an ecumenical vigil that's being organised. So over to you.
Thank you, Claire, very much indeed. It's great to be with you all. So very relevant to this is something which South Bank churches and the Diocese of Southwark have organised. And you're the very first people to have heard about it. But we have organised a vigil for COP26, which is going to take place in Southwark Cathedral from 2 o'clock to 3:45 on Saturday, the 23rd of October, which is just before COP. COP starts the following weekend. We're keeping it very simple. We're going to clear the cathedral completely. There will be some prayer stations, which will be Christian Aid going to be there. I think Catholic are going to be there, and one or two other organisations. I think possibly Operation Noah. And what we're encouraging people to do is to come in groups from their places of worship by pilgrimage, so maybe on foot if you're local, on a bike or on public transport, and come up to the cathedral to arrive between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock on that day. And if you want to, you can bring a letter for creation. This is a initiative of the Church of England and Christian Aid, and those letters for creation will be passed on to faith leaders involved in COP26. And then there's going to be a short liturgy, a short time of prayer between about 3:20 and 3:45. And the Bishop of Kingston will be there and will give us a final blessing, and then we all go home. And my hope is that churches will bring sort of between maybe 5 and 10 people together, a group of people who will congregate in the cathedral. We'll have a time together, we'll do some prayer, and then we'll all go home, perhaps leaving our letters for creation and maybe taking something back to the worship in our own churches or places of worship the next day. So bookings are opening now. This is the official moment at which it goes public. I will put the Eventbrite link in the chat. The flyer isn't quite finalised yet, but as soon as it is, I'll send it to Claire. She's kindly agreed to circulate it to you all. The cathedral takes up to about 500 people, which sounds like a lot, but I have a feeling that it may get subscribed fairly quickly. So do feel free to book for your place of worship. But as I say, we're really encouraging people to come in groups, and more information will follow later. And many thanks to everyone for your engagement in these subjects and for being here this evening. Thank you.